I had reached that kind of silence that weighs on your chest. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that makes you question if love ever lived in the walls at all. We didn't fight much anymore, and honestly, that scared me more than the yelling ever did. Our conversations were reduced to logistics, bills, appointments, what's for dinner. But somewhere deep inside, I still held on to this tiny flicker of hope. I believed we weren't broken, just lost. So I said it one night quietly, "What if we try therapy?" To my surprise, he didn't argue. No eye roll, no sigh. Just a simple nod. That should have comforted me, but instead, it made me feel uneasy, like he already knew how this story would go. Still, I took it as a win. We found someone quickly. She seemed perfect. Warm voice, kind eyes, and a softness that made it easy to open up. During those first sessions, I felt seen, heard, safe, or so I thought. I told her things I hadn't said out loud in years, about how invisible I'd been feeling, how distant he had become, how exhausted I was from trying to hold everything together. She would tilt her head gently when I spoke, nodding in all the right places. I cried more than I expected, but it felt good, like we were finally unpacking something too heavy to carry alone. I left each session hopeful, like maybe this was our way back to each other. But then I started to notice little things. She always seemed to side with him, even when he dismissed my pain or minimized what I was saying. When I brought up moments that had hurt me, she redirected the conversation to how stressed he must have been. She called his distance a natural defense. I started to wonder if I was overreacting, if I was too emotional. I thought I was being heard. I didn't realize I was being erased. Looking back, it's almost laughable how much I trusted that room. I treated it like sacred ground, the one place I could finally speak without walking on eggshells. I was raw in there, honest. I peeled myself open piece by piece, believing that both of them, my husband and the therapist, were listening, were trying. And maybe that's the part that stings the most now. Not just that I was vulnerable, but that I was vulnerable in front of the wrong people. I started noticing how she spoke to him, softer, warmer. When I mentioned how he'd shut down during an argument, she asked me what I could do to create a safer space for him. When I described how he'd forgotten our anniversary, she said, maybe I placed too much importance on dates. I remember sitting there once, blinking through tears, while she smiled at him and said, "It's clear how much you love her." And he said nothing. There were times I looked over at him, hoping for a hand reach, a glance, anything. But he always sat still, arms crossed, wearing that look of calm superiority, like he was just tolerating all of this. And still, I defended him. I defended him when friends asked why I stayed. I defended him when my sister said he didn't deserve another chance. He's trying, I'd say. He's just not good at expressing it. But therapy was supposed to help with that, wasn't it? There was one session where I broke down over something small. I think it was about feeling alone at dinner. I remember the way she shifted in her chair, like she was uncomfortable with my emotions. Then she said, "Sometimes we expect our partners to fill voids that are really our own." I nodded, embarrassed, like I had asked too much. Like needing affection was a flaw. I left that day questioning not just my marriage, but myself. There's a unique kind of ache that comes from feeling outnumbered in a room meant to hold you. I'd lie awake at night replaying our sessions, dissecting her words more than his. Was I the difficult one? The dramatic one? Therapy made me more confused than before. But I kept going, because I believed growth was uncomfortable. That maybe healing wasn't supposed to feel good at first. I held on to that thought like a lifeline. The strange part is, he started enjoying it. He was suddenly eager to go, never missed an appointment, even showed up early. I'd walk into the waiting room and find them laughing about something, their bodies angled just slightly too close. It felt harmless at first, just a therapist trying to put a client at ease. but something about it gnawed at me. There was a warmth between them that I wasn't part of, and it didn't feel professional. Even outside the office, he seemed lighter. Not with me, but in general. He started dressing better on therapy days, smiling more after sessions. At home, though, he was still distant, still unreachable. If anything, therapy seemed to give him more excuses to disconnect. Dr. Lin says I need space. Dr. Lin thinks I shut down because of your tone. My pain was being filtered, reframed, and handed back to me as my own fault. And yet I stayed. I kept showing up, session after session, telling myself we were making progress. That this was what growth looked like. Messy, uneven, uncomfortable. But now I know what I couldn't see then. That healing wasn't happening in that room. Something else was. And whatever it was, it had already begun long before I figured out where to look next. At first, I brushed off the coincidences. A text late at night, him saying he needed to clear his head after a session, showing up early and insisting I meet him there instead of driving together. It all felt explainable. That's what I told myself anyway. But something inside me had shifted. A quiet voice, not panicked, just observant. I started paying closer attention, and once I did, I couldn't unsee it. One evening, I walked past his phone on the kitchen counter and saw a message preview flash across the screen. It wasn't explicit, not exactly, just a soft little sentence. Wish we had more time today. No name attached, but I knew that tone. I knew how he sounded when he was emotionally engaged. It had just never been with me lately. My stomach sank, and that voice in my head stopped whispering. It was screaming now. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I played it cool, too cool maybe. I kissed him on the cheek, asked about dinner, smiled through every syllable, but my hands were trembling when I tucked the kids into bed that night. I waited until he was asleep and quietly opened his phone. He always used the same password. It was strange, how trusting he was, how careless. Or maybe he didn't think I'd ever dare to look. And there it was. Her name, bold at the top of a thread filled with soft language and inside jokes. Flirting, affection, and a photo. Not inappropriate, but intimate. Her, sitting on our therapist's couch, legs tucked under, smiling at something he must have said. She signed her last message with her initial, L. My breath caught in my throat. It was her, Dr. Lin. The woman I had spilled my heart to. The woman who had been spilling hers to him. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen. I kept reading their messages over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the subtext wasn't subtle. It was soaked in intimacy. The way he confided in her, the way she validated him, the emojis, the late-night timestamps. It was all there. She hadn't just broken ethical boundaries. She'd broken me. And he let her. It wasn't just betrayal. It was betrayal packaged as healing. Every tear I cried in front of her, every raw confession I made, she'd heard it all, then used it to get closer to him. That realization hollowed me out, but instead of collapsing, something else took over. I went still. Ice-cold calm. If they were good at hiding, I'd get better at watching. I didn't want a confrontation. I wanted certainty and proof. So I started small. I bought a cheap recording device and tucked it into my bag before every session. I took screenshots of texts, backed them up in hidden folders, emailed them to myself. I began noticing how their stories didn't line up, like he mentioned things we'd never talked about in front of her. My focus narrowed. I didn't eat much. I didn't sleep well. But for the first time in a long time, I felt purpose. I traced payment logs, found private receipts for dinners he never mentioned. I tracked his location one night when he said he needed space. He wasn't at the park like he claimed. He was parked outside her office. The lights were off, but her car was there too. That was the moment it all clicked. They weren't just careless. They were comfortable. They thought I'd never look. But I wasn't the same woman I had been at the start of this. The more I uncovered, the more calculated it all felt. There were patterns, weekly meetings that weren't on the calendar, carefully deleted texts that only survived through cloud backups he didn't know I had access to. She had been guiding our therapy in a direction that slowly rewrote my memories, always painting him as the misunderstood one. And now I saw it clearly. She wasn't just enabling him, she was recruiting him. I remember sitting across from them in one of those final sessions, pretending not to know. Watching her defend his behavior, offer him emotional shelter while I sat there bleeding through my words. I matched her tone, smiled when appropriate, nodded like I was listening. Inside, I was steel. I knew something they didn't. I wasn't looking for healing anymore. I was looking for accountability, and I wasn't going to ask nicely for it. Every recorded session, every screenshot, every breadcrumb I followed gave me clarity. They were professionals at hiding things. But I became a professional at finding them. And with every new piece of evidence, I felt myself growing stronger, sharper, less afraid. I wasn't alone in the dark anymore. I was holding the light. And soon, I'd turn it directly on them, where everyone could see. He still thought he was winning. That smugness never faded. She still spoke to me like I was the problem, fragile, reactive, overly emotional. But I stopped crying after that night in the bathroom. I stopped pleading. Because now I knew what they had taken from me, and exactly what I was going to take back. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. I didn't cry. I didn't explain the whole story. I just said, I need someone who's dealt with therapist misconduct. That got their attention. I met with a legal advisor the very next day, a woman, sharp-eyed, no nonsense. I handed over my files, my audio recordings, my annotated screenshots. She didn't flinch. If even half of this holds, she said, we're looking at serious consequences. Next came the formal complaint to the Board of Ethics. It felt surreal, typing out my story in cold, clinical terms, attaching documents that spelled out my pain. But I did it, methodically, carefully, every date aligned, every conversation documented. This wasn't about spite. It was about record. I wasn't just a betrayed wife anymore. I was a witness, and I knew how to tell the truth. At home, I didn't say a word. I smiled at him over dinner, packed the kids' lunches, laughed when he made dry comments about work. Meanwhile, I recorded everything. Quiet moments of neglect, the way he snapped when our daughter cried too long, the passive-aggressive digs when he thought I wasn't listening. I captured it all. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted protection. For me, for them. The divorce papers were drawn up quietly. No threats, no dramatic scenes. Just a steady, quiet unraveling of the life we'd built. I filed for full custody. My lawyer said, if the board confirms misconduct, this could be devastating for both of them. And she was right. But I didn't feel guilty. I felt focused. They chose to break trust in a room built for healing. I would make sure the consequences happened in a courtroom built for truth. There's something empowering about knowing the truth and not needing to shout it. I moved through our home like a ghost with a mission, folding laundry, preparing meals, tucking the kids into bed, all while carrying a secret that would change everything. He had no idea what I'd already set in motion. I watched him closely now, not with fear or confusion, but with a quiet detachment. I didn't need his explanations anymore. I needed the finish line. There were days when I'd break down behind the bathroom door, pressing a towel to my face so no one could hear me. Not because I doubted myself, but because I was exhausted, from holding it all in, from pretending, from the weight of staying composed when every instinct begged me to scream. But I never let those moments last long. I'd wipe my face, fix my hair, and walk out like nothing had changed. Because on the surface, nothing had. Yet. My lawyer warned me that these cases take time, that the board might stall or question my intentions, that custody battles get ugly. But I had time. I had patience. I had truth. And most importantly, I had my children. They were the only thing I couldn't afford to lose in this. I started documenting even more, not just what he said, but what he didn't. The silence when our son asked him to play. The look in our daughter's eyes when he ignored her tears. Sometimes I'd catch myself wondering if he felt anything at all, guilt, fear, even a flicker of doubt. But he carried on like nothing was wrong. Still texting, Dr. Lin. Still showing up to therapy like it was some holy ritual. The arrogance of it all amazed me. They thought they were safe, tucked behind titles and degrees and boundaries no one dared to question. But I had already begun pulling the floor out from under them. The moment I filed the official custody petition, something shifted inside me. It was no longer just about what they did. It was about what I was building in their aftermath. A life with structure, with safety, with peace. I didn't want my kids growing up thinking love meant emotional withdrawal or manipulation disguised as patience. I wanted them to know what healthy looked like, even if I had to model it alone. He noticed something was off eventually. Asked if I was tired, distracted, distant. I almost laughed. Now he noticed. I told him I was just going through a lot, which ironically wasn't a lie. He never pressed, never once asked what he could do. His world had always been built around selective blindness, around believing I'd always be too soft, too forgiving, too afraid to do anything real. He underestimated me. What I was doing wasn't just for me. It was for every woman who sat on a couch and told her story, only to have it used against her. For every partner who gave someone a second chance, only to be played in return. I wasn't out for vengeance. I was out for balance. And I knew the only way to get it was through documentation, through silence, through patience, and eventually through exposure. The complaints were filed, the paperwork was moving, the lawyer was building her case like a fortress. And me? I was still showing up to therapy, still smiling at the woman who had betrayed me in the most intimate, calculated way. But I had already pulled the first brick from their foundation. The cracks were coming. And when they did, no one would be able to pretend they didn't see them. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, a formal notice from the licensing board, stamped, dated, official. Dr. Lin was being summoned for a preliminary hearing. Just reading it gave me a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't excitement, not really. It was more like gravity, like something long overdue was finally gaining weight. She had spent months making me feel small in a room meant for growth. Now, she'd be the one answering questions. Word got back to her fast. She canceled our next session without explanation. A part of me half expected an apology, a panicked message, some desperate attempt to explain it all away. But nothing came. And honestly, that said more than any confession could. It told me she still believed she could rise above consequence. That her degrees, her calm voice, her ethical mask would somehow protect her. But I wasn't scared of her anymore. At the hearing, she tried to play it cool, blouse neatly pressed, voice steady, vocabulary polished. But the board had everything. My recordings, transcripts, timeline of sessions, screenshots of messages exchanged with my husband. Every moment of manipulation was there, printed in black and white. One board member leaned forward and asked, "Do you acknowledge a breach of boundaries?" Her lips parted, but nothing came out. Just silence. Heavy, loaded silence. Meanwhile, my lawyer was preparing for the custody trial. I sat across from her with folders, flash drives, and timelines. There were no gaps in my case. Every moment of neglect, every cruel dismissal, every choice he made to be absent, it was all logged. "Let's make it clear to the court," she said, "that this isn't just infidelity. This is emotional abandonment. This is parental failure." And that's exactly what I planned to do. The day of the custody hearing, I walked into the courtroom, not as a wife, not even as a victim, but as a mother who refused to be silenced. He showed up in a suit that didn't quite fit, sitting beside a lawyer who looked uncomfortable the moment the judge entered. He glanced at me, tried to offer a soft smile. I didn't return it. That chapter was closed. I wasn't here to rehash pain. I was here to protect what mattered most. I watched him try to explain how therapy brought him clarity, how he fell in love accidentally, how it was all unplanned. He spoke about passion, about connection, about feeling seen. But the judge didn't care about poetic excuses. They cared about timing, about facts, about a therapist violating professional codes while guiding a fragile couple, about a father who repeatedly chose his own gratification over stability for his children. My lawyer presented everything like a symphony. Each document, each timestamp, each contradiction laid out with precision. There was no room for ambiguity, no space for charm to muddy the truth. When the judge asked how long the relationship had been going on, he hesitated. That silence was louder than any answer, because everyone in the room knew this wasn't about one mistake. This was a pattern, a choice, a betrayal that kept unfolding. And as for her, Dr. Lin, her suspension was confirmed by the end of the week. The board found her conduct exploitative, unprofessional, and incompatible with the standards of therapeutic care. She didn't just lose clients, she lost credibility. A license can be reinstated, but a reputation, once fractured like that, becomes a scar that never quite heals. She had gambled her future on my silence. She lost. When it came time for my testimony, I didn't cry. I didn't lash out. I just told the truth, slowly, clearly, without apology. I spoke about the nights I felt invisible in my own home, the sessions where I reached out for help and found only manipulation. I talked about my kids, about what they deserved. The room went quiet when I described the moment I realized our therapist had stopped being neutral and started being his. The judge listened intently, and when the decision came, it was swift. Full custody awarded to me. No shared arrangement, no loopholes. Just a firm declaration. He was unfit to lead, unfit to father. At least, not in this moment. He looked stunned, like someone had pulled the ground out from beneath him. And maybe, in a way, they had. But not with lies, with truth. Truth, finally spoken aloud. As for me, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Like the weight I'd been dragging behind me for months had finally lifted. The court saw what I had lived. They saw the pattern, the danger, the collapse disguised as romance. He tried to reduce everything to feelings, but systems don't run on feelings, they run on facts. And every fact led to one conclusion. The people who were supposed to help me heal had only deepened the wound. They wanted to keep it quiet, their little affair tucked away between couch cushions and half-truths. But healing doesn't happen in secrecy, and consequences, once they start rolling, don't pause for comfort. Now everything was out in the open. Names, choices, timelines. They wanted to heal in secret. Now their choices are public and permanent. He filed an appeal, of course. His pride wouldn't let him sit in the wreckage he created. He called it an overreaction, claimed he was being punished for falling in love. But the system didn't bend for romance, especially not when it came wrapped in deceit and ethical violations. His case was rejected almost immediately. No new evidence, no remorse. Just a man scrambling to rewrite the story after it had already been published. She didn't fare much better. Her name was now flagged in every therapist directory. Parents talked, clients disappeared. A few news outlets picked up the story. Nothing major, but enough to sting. The board's final ruling was clear. License permanently revoked. She tried to shift into coaching work after that, but it didn't stick. You can't rebuild trust when you've made a career out of betraying it. She had gambled on secrecy and lost. I never responded to his messages, but that didn't stop them from coming. The tone changed over time, from angry and defensive to sad and needy. I made a mistake. We could have fixed it. The kids need both of us. I read them once, maybe twice. Then I started deleting them without opening. I owed him nothing, not a conversation, not a response. He had made his choices. I was finally living mine. At night, I'd walk past the empty side of the bed and feel calm. Not happy, not sad, just whole. No second guessing, no pit in my stomach, just quiet. The kind I had begged for during our marriage and never once received. I started sleeping better, laughing more. The kids smiled easier. The house no longer echoed with tension. It finally felt like a home, not a war zone dressed in matching curtains. People ask me sometimes if I'd ever consider forgiving him. If there's room one day for peace. I think what they mean is, would I ever let him back in? And the answer is no. Peace isn't the same as permission. I've made peace with what happened, with who he chose to be, with the fact that love, when misused, can become its own kind of violence. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it definitely doesn't mean reopening the door. One afternoon, I got another message. Just a single line. I miss them. Not, I miss you. Not, I'm sorry. Just them, the kids, the life, the illusion he once took for granted. I stared at it for a long time. Then I turned off my phone and walked into the kitchen, where my daughter was laughing about something silly, milk dripping from her chin, sunlight in her hair. That's where my attention belonged. Not in the past, not in pity. Sometimes I think about Dr. Lynn. I wonder if she ever looks back and regrets it. If she rewatches the tapes in her head, realizing how easily she dismissed another woman's voice while chasing her own desires. But I don't stay there long. That's her burden to carry now, not mine. I spent too many years making space for other people's comfort. Now I only make space for what's real and what's safe. The last message he ever sent said, I made a mistake. And maybe he did. But some mistakes don't get do-overs. Some doors close and stay shut. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I walked down the hallway, where my kids were already in bed, waiting for their goodnight kiss. I curled up beside them, tucked the blankets tight, and whispered, You're safe. He lost a wife, a home, and a future, all for a lie told on a therapist's couch. There's something sacred about quiet mornings now. I wake up before the sun rises, brew a cup of coffee, and sit by the window while the world stretches itself awake. No drama, no tension. Just the soft clink of the spoon against my mug and the sound of my children breathing deeply down the hall. It's not a grand life, not the one I once imagined. But it's mine. And it's honest. And after everything, that's more than enough. I've stopped explaining what happened to people who weren't there. Not because I'm ashamed, but because peace doesn't need an audience. The people who matter already know the truth. The rest can draw their own conclusions. I've learned that survival isn't loud. It's steady. It's saying no more often. It's trusting your gut, even when it's inconvenient. It's realizing that strength isn't about holding on. It's about letting go with clarity. The kids are thriving. Their laughter doesn't carry that anxious edge anymore. They sleep through the night. They don't tiptoe around emotions like landmines. Sometimes my daughter asks why Daddy doesn't come around as much. I tell her gently that sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, and when that happens, we build something better. She always nods like she understands more than she should. Maybe she does. I don't tell them everything. Not yet. But one day, when they're old enough, I will. And I'll tell them that love should never require you to disappear. That any space meant to help you heal should never become a stage for betrayal. That silence is powerful when it's chosen, not when it's imposed. And I'll remind them that I left, not because I was weak, but because I was finally strong enough to stop being erased.